A ballerina collapses mid-performance, her final bow never taken, and the silence that follows is louder than any applause. Behind the velvet curtains and delicate choreography lies a secret so precise, it dances just out of reach, until one mind finds its rhythm. In this story, music is motive, and the truth waits between the notes. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you right now. Let me know in the comments. Settle in, because this mystery begins now. You can't say I never do anything for culture. That Thursday night, I wore my second best grey suit, my worst tie, red, with tiny black ballerinas, and let Lily Rowan lead me into Lincoln Center like I was a prize poodle in wingtip shoes. "It'll be transcendent," she'd said. "It's her farewell performance." A legend I wasn't sure who she was, but if she was dancing in tights, I already wasn't transcending. I was enduring. For the record, I have no grudge against ballet. I respect it, in the way a man respects dentistry. Necessary, precise, and best done by someone else. Lily got us center orchestra seats. I got a brochure with 17 pages of adjectives about the prima ballerina, and a photo of a woman who could snap me in half with a frown. "Irina Miska," Lily whispered as the lights dimmed. "She was trained by Petrenko in Leningrad." "Was he the one who invented torture?" I whispered back. Lily gave me a glare that could freeze gin. The curtain rose, the music soared, and I braced for 90 minutes of artistic agony I wasn't quite prepared for. Irina Miska floated onto the stage like gravity was a rumour. She was all angles and silk, slicing through air as if it had personally offended her. Even I, sitting there with crossed arms and a crossed soul, had to admit, she was something. She didn't just dance, she commanded. Each movement had the snap of intention, like a general issuing silent orders with a toe. "She's 62, Lily whispered proudly. "She moves better than I do getting out of a cab," I muttered. There was an edge to her grace, a tension beneath the elegant. Stage floor. The orchestra faltered. A violin let out an unintended squeal. A dancer at the edge froze in a pose she wasn't supposed to hold. For a few seconds, no one moved. Not even the air. A man 2 rows behind me whispered, "Brilliant." It wasn't. Her limbs didn't settle like a performed fall. They crumpled. The conductor blinked and brought the baton down. The curtains didn't close. The dancers froze. Then a low buzz rolled through the house. The sound of 2,000 cultured throats trying to clear themselves all at once. Lily grabbed my arm. "That wasn't part of the show." "No," I said, "but I think someone just closed the curtain on Irina Miska." It took a solid 30 seconds for the house lights to come up, which in Lincoln Center time is the equivalent of geological ages. Stagehands appeared like startled ants. The orchestra dribbled to a stop. And then the artistic director, gaunt, wild-eyed, and in formal wear 2 sizes too tight, hurried onto the stage, his steps frantic beneath a mask of calm. From the audience came a smattering of confused applause, then silence, then whispering, then louder whispers. "Sit down," a woman hissed. "She's fine," someone muttered. "It's performance art." But I knew that kind of stillness. I'd seen it before. On sidewalks, in lobbies, in places where people weren't supposed to die but did anyway. And then Lily said it, low but sharp. She didn't bow. What? At the end of every solo, she bows. It's ritual. She always bows. She was right. That was the strangest part of all. Not the collapse, not the silence, not even the way the director looked like he was ready to cry. It was the absence of the bow. The gesture that says, "I'm still here." Irina Miska never gave it. When the paramedics arrived, the dancers scattered like pigeons. A curtain finally came down, and then back up again. Though no one clapped this time. Irina was lifted gently by two guys who had likely never seen a ballet in their lives. One of them whispered something to the other, shook his head, and then glanced toward the conductor. "No pulse," he said, too loudly. "No trauma either," his partner muttered. "No blood. No brakes." The audience was herded out with the subtlety of TSA agents during a fire drill. Lily and I lingered, pretending to be media, or important, or both. I caught a stagehand by the wings, sweaty, nervous, with eyes darting like a man who'd misplaced something he shouldn't have had. "What'd you see?" I asked. He looked around, then back at me. "She didn't scream," he said. "She didn't cry. She just stopped." Then, as he turned away, I saw him make the sign of the cross. Quick, furtive, like a man afraid God was watching the show too closely. There were no visible wounds, no scent of almonds, no obvious poison. Just a woman who dropped mid-pirouette and left behind a silence that didn't feel earned. At Lily's insistence, we detoured to a cocktail lounge near Columbus Circle, where the lighting was soft and the bartender poured like he had stock in olives. She nursed a martini. I ordered bourbon and pretended not to be thinking about heart failure, ballet shoes, or that stagehand's twitchy fingers. Lily tried to talk about Irina in the past tense. I let her, but in my head, I kept replaying that fourth spin. The split-second delay, the sudden rigidity of her face. Not pain exactly, more like recognition, like she knew something had gone wrong and hadn't been surprised. "She was the best," Lily said, swirling her glass. "She gave everything, except a bow," I said. That stopped her. Maybe she ran out of time, or maybe, I thought, she chose not to give one. A final signal no one understood. Yet. I didn't say it out loud, but I was already wondering who might have wanted her silence to arrive just then, and how far they'd gone to make sure it did. Back at the brownstone, I found Nero Wolfe in the plant rooms, glaring at a dendrobium as though it had slandered his ancestry. Fritz was humming something rough. Every solo, every show, he didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a long sip of beer, exhaled, and said, "Interesting." Which, from Wolfe, was the equivalent of an air raid siren. We weren't done with Irina Miska. Not yet. The first sign of trouble was Fritz entering the office with a tray of tulip tea and an expression like a man who'd seen a ghost, an expensive, perfumed Russian ghost in a violet hat. "I did not invite her," Fritz murmured. "She walked in." I turned. She wasn't just walking, she was arriving. Long strides, coat flaring like stage curtains, and vowels so sharp they could peel wallpaper. "You are Wolfe," she declared, planting herself in front of his desk like a flag. Wolfe raised one eyebrow. "Indeed. And you are?" "Katya Drozhin, soloist, formerly with the Leningrad State Ballet. Irina Miska was murdered." She said it like she was announcing the weather. "Murder, mid-performance, next to the pas de deux." Wolfe sighed. "Miss Drozhin, don't. I will not be patronized. I danced beside her for 22 years. That collapse? Not accident. Not health. It was an execution masked in music. Executed by whom? That," she said, eyes blazing, "is what I am hiring you to find out." She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaken. She was furious, and I had the feeling we were about to host the storm she rode in on. Wolfe didn't so much as twitch a jowl. He reached for his beer with regal resignation, sipped, and said, "Murder requires both evidence and motive. Do you have either?" "Evidence," she scoffed. "Watch the final act. The music shifts. It skips, a missing cue. Leo knows, so does Valo, and Irina had threatened to expose the change in choreography. You believe someone altered the music to cause her death? I know someone did." I presume, Wolfe said, folding his hands across his waist. You have no technical proof, no coroner's report, no confession. Katia straightened, like she was about to pirouette into court. You mock me. I prefer precision. Archie, meaning me, was leaning against the wall, quietly impressed. Her voice could kill flies mid-air. She was terrified, Katia added, in rehearsals. She whispered of sabotage, something about tempo and trust. Then she dies, and no one questions it. Wolfe's brows knit. A missing cue, you say? Yes. He sipped again. Proceed. Which, in Wolfe speak, meant she had just danced her way into our client list, whether he liked it or not. Katia reached into her velvet handbag and withdrew a long red envelope tied with gold string. It looked like it should contain opera tickets or royal blackmail. Instead, it had cash, enough to buy half a ballet company, or at least a matinee's worth of silence. Wolfe eyed it the way a botanist eyes a suspicious mushroom. I find your approach theatrical, he said. You prefer dull clients? He sighed. I prefer sanity. She slid the envelope across the desk. I don't want gossip. I want facts. Wolfe accepted the envelope with 2 fingers, as if it were covered in cologne and egotism. One more thing, Katia said, lips tightening. Irina wasn't a saint. She ruined careers, mine included. But she didn't deserve that ending. Noted, Wolfe said, though your honesty is unusually convenient. It's not honesty, it's war. She turned on her heel, leaving perfume and defiance in her wake. Archie, Wolfe said dryly, we appear to have acquired a peacock, with talons, I added. 5 minutes later, because the universe has a sense of timing even dancers would envy, the front door banged open and in stomped Inspector Kramer. No knock, no bell. Just brute entry in a wrinkled overcoat and an expression that belonged on a ruptured boiler. Wolfe, he barked. What the hell are you doing? I was cultivating serenity, Wolfe said. You appear to be interrupting. You're poking into the ballet mess. I am inked up. Kramer stood square in the center of the room, like a man who'd forgotten why he came, but still intended to punch something. Who's your client? He snapped. Katia Drozhin, Wolfe said. The rival ballerina? That snake. Her species is not relevant. Her standing. Soloist, trained under Petrenko, is. Hell it isn't. You can't investigate a natural death on the say-so of a professional backstabber. I can if she's not next of kin, Wolfe replied, silk smooth. Kramer's face twisted. What? She is not family. Ergo, I am not interfering with a medical investigation or probate process. No obstruction. Kramer glared at me. You put him up to this? I just take notes, I said cheerfully. Why are you even wasting your time? She didn't bow, Wolfe repeated. Kramer opened his mouth, then shut it. Then jabbed a finger toward Wolfe. Don't make me clean up your mess. He turned on his heel, slammed the door hard enough to rattle the orchids, and stormed out. Wolfe reached for his beer and muttered, Such vibrato. He should have been a baritone. Katia hadn't left the building. She was in the front room with Fritz, sipping tulip tea like it was victory champagne. When Wolfe summoned her back, she glided in as if she'd won a duel. Well, she said, he was charming. He was himself, Wolfe replied. Now, before we proceed, what precisely connects you to Irina's final rehearsal? I have the recording, she said. The one used the day before her death. And she told me afterward that it felt wrong, too fast, a beat missing. She said Leo was acting cagey. That is not proof. No. But she also confided that Valo had refused to file an official complaint when she brought it up. Said it would cause scandal. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Why would she trust you? He asked. Katya's eyes cooled. Because 2 weeks earlier she accused me of sabotaging a performance. Did you? No, she said. But I nearly lost my contract. It taught me how easily she could ruin someone, and how desperate she might become when the tables turned. She was... After Katya left, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. That woman, he said, makes opera singers seem understated. She's got motive, ego, and a flair for melodrama, I offered. She also has the only tangible lead. He held out his glass. I refilled it. You believe her? I asked. I believe she believes herself. That is often sufficient for movement. Next steps? Locate the rehearsal recording. Secure Irina's will, if it exists. Interview Leo Banner again. I want his fingers to sweat. And Valo? Too preening for suicide. Possibly too stupid for murder. Investigate him anyway. And Miss Drozhin? Wolfe opened his eyes. Do not provoke her. She has claws. Understood. Archie, he said wearily, for God's sake, bring back peace and silence. If we find it, I said, grabbing my coat. Should I gift wrap it? He grunted, which, coming from Wolfe, was basically applause. I showed up at the studio looking like I was auditioning for a role in Guys and Dolls instead of Giselle. Grey pinstripe suit, camel overcoat, and polished shoes that had never known a plie. Within 30 seconds, I was attracting more side-eye than a late entrance. Ballet dancers, it turns out, have the peripheral vision of owls and the judgment of old Manhattan socialites. I nodded at a girl mid-grand jeté. She flinched like I'd pulled a knife. The rehearsal was Irina's last piece, an angular, modern solo with pauses that felt like gasps. The replacement dancer tried to nail it, but I could already tell she was 2 measures behind Irina's ghost. At the far end, the company pianist played with crisp detachment. I clocked him. Leo Banner, a man whose fingers moved like butter, but whose neck was sweating like a politician at a paternity hearing. I waited until the solo ended. The dancer bowed, unlike Irina, and the lights dimmed. That was my cue. It was time to ask the man on the keys why his nerves were louder than his notes. Leo Banner looked like the kind of man who should be teaching Debussy to prep school girls, not playing for prima ballerinas, with murder rumors hanging in the air like stage fog. Mr. Banner, I asked, sliding into the piano pit like I belonged there. He adjusted his glasses, straightened his spine, and said, Yes? Archie Goodwin, and following up on Irina missed his palms on his knees. Maurice said she did. Funny, I said. Maurice says a lot. He stiffened. You think I altered the score without permission? I think you're sweating like you played a funeral. He didn't respond, but his fingers twitched. And for a pianist, that was practically a scream. Maurice Valo made me wait 20 minutes outside his office, which was exactly 19 and a half more than I had patience for. When he finally emerged, he wore a black turtleneck, pinched expression, and an accent that dipped and swirled like old Bordeaux. Mr. Goodwin, he purred. From Wolfe. You've heard of us? I read. He ushered me in with the air of a man who believed his chair should be framed in gold leaf. The room smelled like orchids and desperation. We're following up on Irina Miska. Tragedy, he said, clasping his hands. Utter tragedy. She died mid-performance. Yes. No signs of trauma, poison, or health flags. Just dropped heart, he said. Convenient. He smiled. Are you suggesting foul play? I'm suggesting she didn't bow. He blinked. She was unconscious. She wobbled, then collapsed. But there was a moment, just before Valo leaned back. You're wasting your time. The ballet must move forward. And the music? His lips thinned. Leo composed the accompaniment. Which version? Irina had final say. I stood. So no changes were made without her blessing? He didn't answer, just looked past me, like the curtain had already dropped. Eliza Keane looked like someone who had almost been famous once, and never quite forgave the world for it. I found her in the corner dressing room, surrounded by makeup cases and floral-scented denial. She dabbed her eyes when I walked in. Half real tears, half hopeful. "You're from the papers?" she asked. "Wolfe," I said. "Better pay, worse deadlines." She gave a shaky laugh. "You think I had something to do with it?" "I think you're here and Irina's not." She looked down. "She never let me perform. Not once. I trained for 3 years under her, perfected her solo blindfolded." "She say why?" "She said I had no gravitas," she snorted. "But last week she said something changed." She looked nervous. She kept asking Leo about tempo. I nodded. "And now?" "She's gone. And I got this." She handed me a small slip of paper, torn, handwritten, left under her mirror that morning. It read, "Your time is coming. Bow well." I tucked it into my pocket. "You tell anyone?" She shook her head. "Smart," I said. "Now don't start." She already was. Dmitri Miska was built like a librarian and spoke like a man who didn't enjoy words unless they were doing taxes or settling estates. He met me in the studio lounge, buttoned up, jaw tight, grief packed away like a folded shirt. "Irina died with peace in her heart," he said, after offering me a seat I didn't take. "That's one theory," I replied. "She was ready. She had done everything except bow." He blinked. She collapsed. She hesitated. There was a second, a breath, then nothing. Dmitri looked down. She was exhausted. She had been fighting. Fighting who? Time, the company, herself. I leaned in. "You're managing her estate?" "Yes. Royalties, rights, archival contracts." He stiffened. "Naturally. She changed her will recently?" "That's privileged, but it happened." A pause. "She updated the rights to her final performance. She wanted the recording controlled. She was paranoid." "She say why?" "She said she didn't trust Leo or Valot." "And you?" He exhaled. "She didn't say, but she knew you'd handle it." "I always did." I stood. "Not this time," I said, and left him with his silence. Backstage again, I found a stagehand who looked like he'd sell state secrets for a sandwich. $20, I said, flashing green, for anything weird left lying around. He didn't hesitate. From behind a stack of prop crates, he pulled a crumpled music sheet. "Found this Monday. Didn't match the rest." I smoothed it out. It wasn't Irina's final score. It was rehearsal notes for another number, covered in red ink and slash desk. Not Irina's, but notes. Angry ones. He scanned it. Sloppy. "That's the charm." He tapped a line. "Leo again. And tempo." He nodded. "It is always rhythm. Tempo governs life and death." Poetic. Mathematical. I filled him in. Valo's posturing. Eliza's panic. Dimitri's dodging. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "They are all liars." "Of course. But one is a composer." "You think Leo altered the piece?" "I think he altered something. Music, perhaps, or motive. Still no poison. No trauma. No need. Sometimes death is a frequency." That made me pause. Wolfe leaned back. "Find the original score. Compare it to the final version. I want precise bars, notes, and timestamps." "Got a piano I can borrow?" "No," he said. "But Fritz plays Chopin poorly. It will suffice." And just like that, we were shifting key. The melody was changing, and Wolfe was conducting. You'd be amazed how much damage a cheap flower and a smirk can do in the right dressing room. I brought Eliza Keane a single white rose, classy but not clingy, and leaned in the doorway like I was auditioning for Casablanca the musical. She was perched on a velvet bench, robe cinched, hair pinned, eyes red. "That's for you," I said. "Don't read into it. I just thought it matched your mood." She took it like it was the first kindness she'd seen in a week. "I didn't mean to be so jumpy," she murmured. "Everything's been loud. That happens when people drop dead mid-performance." Her fingers curled around the stem. "You think it was murder?" "I think you got a note telling you to bow well, and the woman who didn't bow ended up horizontal. That makes me curious." Her lips trembled just a little. She opened her mouth, and a scream ripped through the hallway, sharp enough to make both of us flinch. That wasn't stage acting. That was real. Eliza dropped the rose. I was already moving, coat swinging, pulse up. Something had gone very wrong. And if I had to bet money, it was upstairs. In Vallow, the hallway was a blur of dancers, assistants, and one very unfortunate janitor trying to mop a floor that no longer mattered. I followed the sound and found Maurice Vallow's office door wide open. Inside, chaos reigned. The artistic director himself was slumped in his designer swivel chair, looking less like a maestro and more like an exhibit in a forensic seminar. Blood pooled under him, dark, rapid, final. Pinned just beneath his collarbone, gleaming in the light like an ornament from hell, was a ballerina hairpin. Gold-plated, rhinestone-tipped, and unmistakably theatrical. It looked familiar. A woman in a pantsuit shrieked. Someone else ran for security. The assistant stage manager hovered near the threshold, white as a tutu and shaking. "Don't touch anything," I said. It didn't need saying, but habit dies hard. I leaned in just close enough to confirm what was obvious. Maurice Vallow was not directing anything, ever again. I stepped back, taking in the decor. Cluttered desk, 3 clocks, one broken, and a still-playing cassette tape in the corner. Debussy. The track skipped once, twice, then stopped. Just like Vallow. And I knew, right then, that the curtain hadn't fallen on this show yet. Not by a long shot. Finally, I please discover an over. There are plenty of things you expect to see in a murder scene. Blood, bad lighting, and a cop or two breathing down your neck. What you don't expect is costume jewelry. But there it was. The hairpin. It wasn't just any bauble. It was part of Irina Miska's final costume. I remembered it clearly from that night at Lincoln Center, shimmering in her hair as she bowed. Correction, didn't bow. After the collapse, there'd been a fuss backstage about missing props. Katya mentioned it. Eliza denied knowing. Leo blinked too much. But nobody found the pin. Until now. Lodged beneath Maurice Vallow's collarbone like an insult. No gun, no blade. Just a decorative piece of death with rhinestones. The message went back to her. "I'm saying it stabbed a man who ran her studio." That's enough thread to interest Wolfe. Damn Wolfe. I didn't comment. No need. Kramer pulled out a handkerchief and mopped his neck. "Every time you show up near a corpse, I lose 6 hours of sleep." "Sleep is overrated, and so's your charm. I'll put it on my resume." He grunted, then waved over the crime scene crew. But he didn't tell me to leave. And that told me something too. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in his usual throne, a book open but ignored. "You're late," he said. "You're psychic. Spare me the sarcasm. What happened?" I gave him the rundown. Vallow, the chair, the pin, the blood. At hairpin, his eyes flicked upward. "Describe it." "Gold, rhinestone, from Irina's last costume, lodged in Vallow like a prop with a grudge." He drummed his fingers once, twice. I had dismissed Valo as ornamental. Guess someone else didn't. He frowned. Did the wound suggest force? Angle. Downward, from in front, quick, like someone didn't want to struggle. Cowardice or efficiency? Or drama? Wolfe muttered something about modern vanity and reached for his beer. Bring me the room's dimensions. Exact position of the chair. Distance from door to desk. Lighting layout. Anything symbolic on the shelves. You think the scene was staged? I think a man killed with a hairpin in his own office is either poetic or foolish, or both. He grunted. And get me Valo's schedule for that day. I want to know who wasn't supposed to be there. Done. And Archie. Yes? Move quickly. The second act has begun. I found Eliza back in the dressing room, pale and shaking, mascara sliding south. You saw something, I said. No, you did. Don't lie. She pressed a hand to her chest. I can't. Sure you can. You just did. Her lips trembled. Then finally she nodded. I saw someone walk into Valo's office, just before the scream. Who? She hesitated. Too long. Eliza. I can't, she whispered. I'm not safe. You're less safe if you stay quiet. She looked up. You don't understand. Try me. She took a breath, but didn't speak. Then shook her head violently. I can't. I'll lose everything I wanted to push. I didn't. Instead, I scribbled a number on the back of a flyer. You remember this if you grow a spine. She took it, hands trembling. You'll tell Wolfe. If you don't, he'll find out anyway. She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes said she knew that part already. Back in the car, I did what Wolfe hates. I connected dots without proof. Leo wrote the music. Irina felt something was wrong. The tempo shift. Valo brushed it off. Irina dies. Valo ends up stabbed with the very pin that vanished the night of her death. Eliza gets a threatening note. Dmitri says she was paranoid. Katya screams sabotage. And now the score, both literal and figurative, was bleeding. I pulled over, checked the crumpled rehearsal sheet again. Red marks, tempo notes, angry arrows. If Wolfe was right, and let's admit it, he usually is, then the weapon wasn't just a pin. It was a plan. Music manipulated, choreography corrupted, and murder dressed in satin. The pin wasn't just convenience, it was a message, something theatrical, designed to echo, and whoever delivered it had a taste for encores. I cranked the engine and headed for the brownstone. It was time for Wolfe to read between the lines, and this time the notes might sing. Wolfe doesn't believe in televised ballet. He believes in symmetry, orchids, and baked Fritz potatoes, preferably in that order. So when I wheeled in the office TV and popped in the rehearsal footage, I knew I was testing the limits of his tolerance. He lasted 9 minutes and 43 seconds. This, he said, reaching for his beer, is visual cacophony. That's just the warm-up. Wait for Irina's solo. Reluctantly, he watched as Irina glided across the screen, angles sharp, lines clean, breath held like punctuation. She performed the routine as if each movement were chiseled out of marble, muttered through 2 archived clips we'd received from the studio. First was an interview with Katya Drozhin from 5 years back, all cheekbones and shade. She says, Fritz translated, that Irina stole choreography from her. Did she elaborate? Fritz nodded. She took the spiral descent from La Douleur. I saw my movement in her steps. That's a quote. Wolfe murmured. The second clip showed Irina denying the claim, but not convincingly. She laughed too much. Her eyes darted. She calls Katya a fire without direction. A flame, I asked. No, more like a burnt fuse. Wolfe exhaled. So, theft, rivalry, and no love lost. He sipped his beer. Why is it always the artists who lack subtlety? Fritz, bless him, didn't answer. Leo Banner wasn't hard to find. He was holed up in the basement rehearsal space, banging out scales like he was trying to outplay a guilty conscience. Mind if I intrude? I asked, already inside. He flinched. Mr. Goodwin. I've got a follow-up. He didn't look up. Vallow, I said. He threatened you recently. Silence. I tried again. Because the way he ended up, it feels personal. He stopped playing. He said he'd tell the board, Leo muttered. Expose me. Expose what? My arrangements. Some of them weren't entirely mine. I blinked. Plagiarism. Let's call it inspired borrowing. He found out. Said he'd ruin me unless I backed off the arena project. But you didn't. He shook his head. It was my best work. Even with arena. Tense. It was worth it. So Vallow blackmailed you, and now he's dead. I didn't kill him. I leaned in. You're also in debt. Deep debt. He looked up, finally, to someone who doesn't take late payments. Name? He said nothing, but the way he went back to playing, soft, slow, minor key, I knew he'd just confessed something. Maybe not murder, but mind if I ask about Moscow? I said casual. Her wrist twitched. You read my file? Wolfe reads everything, I skim. She snapped the compact shut. What do you want? The truth. She scoffed. You'll need a longer hallway. You were expelled. For sabotage. It was politics. You slipped rosin on a rival's path. Her jaw set. She was better. I was angry. And Arena? She was perfect. Her voice cracked on the word. Too perfect. I tilted my head. Did you hate her? I envied her. Same thing. No, she said. I respected her. And now? Katya's eyes flicked sideways. Now I pity her. Which, from Katya, might have been the cruelest thing she'd said all day. Eliza Keane showed up at the brownstone with mascara streaks, shaking hands and a folded piece of paper that looked like it had been gripped by someone hoping it would turn into a prayer. Wolfe didn't stand. He rarely does. What now? He asked without looking up from botanical regression in hybrid cultivars. This, I said, taking the note. It read, Your bow comes next. Handwritten, slanted, nervous ink. Wolfe extended a hand. I passed it over. He held it at eye level for 3 full minutes, the way a jeweler inspects a flawed ruby. No envelope. Eliza shook her head. I found it taped to my mirror. Any fingerprints? No. I wiped it. Instinct. Unfortunate. He studied the script. Rushed. Flourished in the loops. Sharp pressure on the downstroke. A woman, or a man pretending to be one. He turned it slightly. The calligraphy of cowardice. What does it mean? Eliza asked. It means, Wolfe said, someone is theatrical, frightened, and wishes to suggest threat without assuming responsibility. Like an understudy preparing for a solo. She turned pale. I suggest, Wolfe added, you don't perform alone for a while. Eliza nodded. She didn't look reassured. After Eliza left, I ran down the list again, one by one. Motives, means, coming from Wolfe, meant one thing. He wasn't. Wolfe had his feet up on the ottoman, which for him is practically combat stance. I had the couch and the list. The suspect list, now littered with motive, lies, and rhinestones. Dmitri, I said, He's the only one who doesn't seem guilty. Exactly, Wolfe said. He's cool, collected, cooperative. Wolfe raised a brow. Do you recall the principle of displacement? Not fondly. If each person reflects pressure differently, Dimitri's lack of stress is conspicuous. He hasn't raised his voice. He hasn't denied anything. He hasn't even asked questions. He's calm. He's calculated. You think he did it? I think, Wolfe said, that innocence can be mimicked. But absence, that's a performance of another kind. I leaned back. Okay, what next? Pressure. You will revisit him. Mention the will, the recordings, Eliza's note. He won't crack. No, Wolfe said. But if he flinches, we proceed. And if he doesn't, then we proceed differently. I stood. Anything else? Yes, don't eat anything he offers. That, I admit, chilled me a little. Wolfe had just finished his second bottle of afternoon beer when he leaned back, laced his fingers across his bulk and said, "We shall stage an audition." I looked up from the notebook. Say that again, slower. A false audition. You will invite them. All four. For what? A fictitious ballet charity. Uh-huh. Just to clarify, have you lost your mind, or finally decided to use it? He ignored me, of course. We shall tell them it is a gala, a tribute to Miska, naturally, with high-profile patrons, recordings, perhaps a small honorarium, enough to compel performance, not suspicion. You think they'll fall for it? I think they are performers, he said, and we shall offer them a stage. I scribbled, shaking my head. You do realize you're asking me to direct a one-act play starring a murderer? Exactly. And we shall observe the performance. Every movement. The fictitious Hudson Arts Guild was born in my mouth, and blessed with a mailing address in Yonkers, a silent board of directors, and a sudden interest in honoring Irina Miska's artistic legacy with a private, salon-style tribute. First call, Leo Banner. He paused. But I haven't prepared anything. Just a short demonstration. Your work with Irina was iconic. The Guild would be thrilled. He agreed, nervously. Second, Katja. She agreed before I finished the sentence, then demanded to know who else had been invited. I dodged. Eliza took more coaxing. I don't think I'm ready. You're honoring Irina. You're already ready. And finally, Dimitri, who replied, Why would they want me? Because you managed the last icon. The Guild admires control silence. Then, fine. All four confirmed, which meant 4 egos, 1 trap, and 0 room for error. Wolfe wanted bows. He was about to get curtain calls. If you ever need a man to bug a room, file a nail, and win a chess game simultaneously, call Saul Panzer. He showed up an hour early with 2 suitcases, a satisfied smirk, and an eyebrow already raised. Audition, huh? He said, pulling wire from his coat. You going into theatre now? No. Wolfe's directing. God help us. He set to work rewiring the drawing room like it was opening night. A mic beneath the centre table. Another behind the shelf of unread Italian poetry. One in the armrest of Wolfe's chair. That one, I admit, was poetic. He tested sound levels, adjusted for echo, and even arranged the chairs into what he called motivated seating. If he ever takes this full time, Saul muttered, he should call it the passive-aggressive stage. Wolfe, who had remained silent during the entire setup, finally said, Humour is rarely helpful, Mr. Panzer. It's all I've got, Saul said. This crowd you're hosting? They don't kill with bullets. They kill with bows. That line lingered, especially because we knew someone already had. Leo Banner arrived first, early, wrinkled, and the bow is prideful, measured. That was surrender. You think he's guilty? I think he's weak. Which, Wolfe often said, was just as dangerous. Eliza Keene floated in like she'd been practicing her entrance for days. Hair up, face calm, eyes flickering like candlelight. I wasn't sure what to bring, she said. Bring yourself, Wolfe replied. And movement. She nodded, stepped forward and danced. A short, soft piece from Swan Lake. 3 minutes, mostly footwork and graceful turns, no music, just her breath and the creak of polished wood. When she stopped, she bowed. It was perfect. Not hesitant, not exaggerated, just correct. Wolfe tilted his head. Eliza, he said, have you studied the Russian bow? Yes. Irina insisted on it. I see. He made a note. Eliza fidgeted. Was it wrong? No, Wolfe said. It was exact. She smiled, unsure whether that was praise. Thank you, he added. That will be all. As she left, Wolfe muttered, curious. What? She's terrified, but she learned. Learned what? How to act like she wasn't. He glanced at the door, and perhaps Archie, who to fear most. Katia Drozhin arrived in full regalia, flowing scarf, sharp cheekbones, and the expression of a woman preparing to accept a national medal or start a bar fight. She bowed before she spoke. It was deep, commanding, pure St. Petersburg. Then she straightened and hissed. What exactly is this tribute? A recognition of artistic contribution, Wolfe replied. To Irina, to those around her, she sniffed. Then it should be mine. You are welcome to make that case. She didn't dance. She monologued. About Irina, betrayal, beauty, broken artistry, and one stolen costume that had died in darkness. Wolfe let her go, then asked, and your bow earlier? What informed it? She blinked. My training, no instinct. She bristled. It is instinct. He nodded, noted. As she left, she passed Archie without a word, just a sideways cut of her eye that could slice granite. Wolfe jotted a final line. She knows the ritual, and she knows its power. I assume I am last, he said. You are, Wolfe replied. Do sit. He did. Mr. Miska, Wolfe began. You are not a performer. No, but you managed one, with precision. Yes, Irina's final piece. Did you observe any deviation? I don't perform. I handle contracts. And emotion. He looked at Wolfe. Is that relevant? More than you'd think. Wolfe gestured towards the space where the others had danced. If you were asked to demonstrate respect in this room, publicly, how would you express it? Dmitri frowned. Verbally. And physically? A pause. Then a nod. No more. No bow? Wolfe asked. Not necessary. Not in your tradition. I was raised on efficiency. Ah, Dmitri stood. Are we done? For now. He left without expression. Wolfe, still as a statue, finally said, That was telling. You mean the non-bow? Precisely. Everyone else acted. He refused. Cultural thing? Perhaps, or something far more deliberate. He looked at me. One does not perform respect if they never felt it. After Dmitri's exit, Wolfe remained silent for a full 2 minutes, eyes closed, fingers steepled. Then he opened them. One of them revealed themselves, he said. By what they said? No. By how they bowed? He nodded. The gesture speaks. It's cultural, emotional, instinctive. Irina refused hers. A final signal. One of them mirrored that silence. I leaned in. Dmitri? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his beer and said, Prepare the files, Archie. For what? For confrontation. Wolfe stood, slowly. And remember, in this world the dead may fall, but the guilty always bow. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, fingertips steepled, lips pursed like he was in mourning. Not for Irena Miska, mind you, but for the insult to his intelligence. "Archie," he said, "fetch the original score Irena performed that night. From the studio archive." No, from Neptune's pantry. Of course, the studio archive. So, I trotted down to the Arden Ballet Company and gave their poor assistant archivist original score. He didn't touch it, just nodded towards the table. "Compare it with this," he said. He had a copy of the sheet from the night of the incident, the taped version. A printed copy with one passage marked in red ink, circled like it had committed a felony. He beckoned me over, pointed at the marked section. "Observe. Here, see that measure? Looks like a mess of sharps and a migraine. It's a harmonic overlay, a high-frequency interval, not detectable by most ears but measurable in decibels." I raised an eyebrow. "So the sheet music was booby-trapped?" "In essence," Wolfe replied. "The altered frequency, when performed on a grand piano tuned in a particular fashion, produces a resonance capable of triggering ventricular arrhythmia in a body predisposed." "Like Arena's?" "Precisely. The killer designed a musical passage, not to delight the ear, but to still the heart." He handed me an audio recording of the performance, his voice low. "Play it only once, and don't do it with headphones. Leave it to Wolfe to turn Chopin into a murder weapon." I had to admit, it gave a whole new meaning to the phrase killer composition. By the time I got back to Leo Banner's apartment, the hall smelled like stale coffee and unanswered questions. His door wasn't locked, just cracked like someone had left mid-thought. Inside was a postcard version of disarray. The piano bench was overturned, a cracked glass on the floor, and a metronome ticking pointlessly on its side. Leo's prized Bosendorfer sat like an abandoned suspect. I checked the closet. Bare. Dresser drawers open. Sheet music, scattered and torn. He hadn't just stepped out. He'd evaporated. No blood, no struggle, just the soft echo of a man in retreat. I found one thing of interest. A photograph of Irena on stage, framed and cracked, face down on the floor. I picked it up. The back had scribbled notation, possibly more than music, maybe a message. Wolfe would want it. I made the call. "Gone," I told him. "Banner's ghosted, and he took the melody with him." Wolfe exhaled. "Then the rhythm has quickened." The murderer knows we're counting measures. Katya's dressing room smelled like lavender, talcum, and panic. She was slumped in her chair, mascara smeared, and her left wrist bruised, like someone had twisted it hard. A broken metronome lay at her feet, its insides shattered, like glass nerves. A stagehand named Devon found her when she didn't respond to the stage call. He wasn't bright, but he was earnest and terrified. "I just knocked and she wasn't answering. Then I opened the door and—" Yeah, then he panicked. Katya groaned as I waved smelling salts under her nose, and her eyes fluttered like curtains in a storm. "What happened?" I asked. I was rehearsing. Then— nothing." She looked around like the room had betrayed her. I checked the lock. No signs of forced entry. The window? Shut. Her handbag was untouched. No robbery. Just a silent assault. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was grim. They silenced the only witness who knew the rhythm was wrong. "You think she was the next target?" "No. She was a test. That chilled me more than Fritz's leftover cold vichyssoise. Eliza Keane was the kind of girl who answered every call, even when she shouldn't. So when she didn't show up for rehearsal, or dinner, or my third call in a row, my gut tightened. The door to her apartment was ajar. Not forced, not broken, just waiting, like a half-whispered confession. Inside, her suitcase lay open on the bed, half-packed. There was no sign of struggle. The dance bag sat by the dresser, zipped. Her shoes were missing. Her studio ID card lay on the nightstand, face up. The timestamp showed she scanned it an hour before Katya's attack. I called Wolfe. She left, voluntarily or otherwise, but she didn't take much. Then she didn't go far, Wolfe murmured, but she was meant not to be found. Eliza had performed that night, just like Katia, just like Irina. That made 3 women and 1 weapon that didn't need a trigger finger, only a key signature. I locked the door behind me, though I had a hunch it wouldn't matter anymore. Wolfe looked at me with the patience of a man dealing with someone who prefers crayons to logic. "You've seen the pattern," he said. That was the bombshell. Wolfe wasn't accusing Leo, not directly. He was saying someone else took Leo's theory and turned it into murder. "You mean we're not hunting the composer?" I asked. "No, Mr. Goodwin," he said. "We're pursuing the conductor." That evening, the brownstone went into siege mode. Fritz locked the kitchen. Saul Panzer arrived, silently. I even saw Wolfe crack his knuckles. That's how serious it was. Wolfe called the precinct. "I will require Inspector Kramer's presence tonight." "Evidence?" Kramer growled on the other end. "I will provide revelation." That got him. At 8 p.m., Wolfe sat in his chair, arms resting like judgment itself. The suspects entered. Katia, bruised but defiant. Dmitri, aloof. Eliza, pale but calm. No Leo. Wolfe didn't waste time. The murder of Irina Mishka was not passionate. It was composed, layered, choreographed. Her death came not from poison or blade, but from sound. He gestured to Saul, who played the marked passage on the upright piano. The suspects stiffened. Katia flinched. Dmitri blinked. Eliza winced. Wolfe rose. "Only one of you knew the precise resonance that could kill. Only one rehearsed it, again and again, on that very piano." His voice hardened. "Dmitri Mishka, you killed your sister with a frequency you claimed not to understand. But your military acoustic files tell another story." Dmitri stood, jaw clenched. "You have no proof." "No," Wolfe replied. "Then kindly, maestro, play us a confession." The thing about getting people to show up at Nero Wolfe's brownstone is, it isn't a request. It's a summons dressed in velvet. And when Wolfe wants the full cast in attendance, my day turns into a 3-act tragedy with me in all the roles. The caller, the persuader, the threatener, and the guy who gets called names. It started with Leo Banner, who apparently found the courage to resurface, but none of the manners to make it painless. "I have nothing more to say," he informed me over the phone. "Great," I said. "You can come say it to Wolfe's face at 4. Next, Katia. She sounded shaken, which I took as a sign she'd seen something nasty in the dark and wasn't sure it hadn't followed her home. Still, she agreed. Dmitri was his usual frost-coated self, questioning the legality, the necessity, and my credentials in the same breath. I gave him Wolfe's line, "You may refuse, but that would be most unwise." That worked. Eliza, poor kid, trembled so hard I could hear it through the line, but she squeaked out a yes. By noon, I'd booked 4 seats for the showdown. Wolfe's only response was a grunted, "satisfactory." High praise in his native tongue. Wolfe's idea of preparation was half ritual, half tyranny. He began by glaring at the furniture like it had committed slander. Then he summoned Fritz and instructed him, without blinking, to polish the terrestrial globe. Not the usual swipe, Fritz. A full luster. The brass equator must gleam. Fritz, used to this brand of lunacy, nodded gravely and went at it like a man tuning a Stradivarius. Next came the semicircle of chairs. Wolfe personally directed me as though I were laying trap wires in a jungle. 1 inch too far left, and he would sniff with disdain. Too close to the orchid table, and he threatened violence. Well, verbal violence, which for him is practically bloodshed. "Archie," he finally said, "the door is to be closed precisely at 4:05. Do not indulge your penchant for drama. Punctuality is its own performance. I saluted. Shall I take a bow afterward? No, you shall sit down and silence yourself. At 3:50, the room was set. The lighting, the seating, the psychological geometry, everything poised for maximum discomfort. Wolfe wasn't staging a meeting. He was raising the curtain on Act 3. They arrived like passengers called to the deck of a sinking ship. Katya first, lips pale, eyes sharp. Then Dmitri, who managed to sneer without using any muscles. Eliza next, flinching at the doorbell like it was the tolling of her own bell. And lastly, Leo Banner, with a peer. She died because someone in this room composed her death into the measure. And now, he smiled faintly. Now we shall hear the encore. Wolfe let the silence simmer like a consommé on low heat. Then he reached for the annotated sheet of music that had been resting beside his beer glass like a silent witness. This, ladies and gentlemen, he said, tapping the page, is not merely a score. It is an indictment. He fixed Leo Banner with a gaze usually reserved for misbehaving orchids. 15 years ago, Mr. Banner was disgraced. His early composition, Vespers at Twilight, was revealed to contain passages suspiciously similar to a Czech masterwork never published in the West. Katya stiffened. Leo twitched. The discovery, Wolfe continued, was not incidental. It was delivered quietly, maliciously, and with exquisite cruelty by Irina Vukovic. She exposed him not to correct a wrong, but to avenge an old romantic slight. Wolfe paused to sip beer. Revenge, like music, requires time and arrangement. He gestured again at the sheet. Years later, he repaid her. In 4 movements, hidden in tempo, woven into phrasing, an arrhythmic motif precisely calibrated to exploit her heart condition. Not enough to kill the average performer, but for Irina, it was a metronomic death sentence. And Valo? Dmitri asked, voice dry. Ah. The conductor noticed. He confronted Mr. Banner. A blackmail arrangement was proposed, but as with all men who fancy themselves conductors of fate, Valo found himself silenced by the very symphony he uncovered. The room held its breath. Wolfe, of course, breathed easily. She recognized it, Wolfe said, quietly now, the timbre of his voice tuned to something almost resembling compassion. Midway through the second act, Irina had absolute pitch and, more critically, absolute time. She felt the sabotage. He turned to Katya. She did not bow at the end. You remember that? Katya nodded, pale. Her instinct knew what her mind could not name. The tempo betrayed her. A shift, subtle to the audience, imperceptible to Valo, perhaps even beautiful to critics. But to her, it was. He tapped the margin of the sheet. The altered bars appear benign. But see how the triplets are compressed in measure 43. The phrasing breathes wrong. It forces tension in the diaphragm and acceleration in the pulse. She stepped back instead of forward, I said, remembering. She refused the bow. Indeed. That was her final protest. She would not lend dignity to what she sensed, viscerally, was an execution. Leo said nothing, but I saw it. The sweat, the flicker behind his eyes, the sudden frantic blink of a man losing grip on his lie. We weren't playing anymore, and Wolfe wasn't finished. Wolfe rose. That, by itself, was enough to make the air shift. He picked up the sheet again, turned it toward Leo, and said, "This is your handwriting, Mr. Banner. Annotated in pencil, bottom margin." Leo blinked at it. Wolfe didn't wait. "Your note from the final rehearsal. Reduce crescendo, make her feel the edge. That was your directive, was it not?" Leo stared at the page as if it had turned into a loaded gun. Then his chair scraped backward with a screech. He was on his feet. "You sanctimonious bastard!" he hissed, switching to check for the curse. I stood fast. Katya gasped. Eliza flinched so hard her chair shifted an inch. Leo lunged for the door. He had 3 good strides. What he didn't have was a chance. The kitchen door cracked open like a silent cymbal. Saul Panzer moved like breath through a reed. He didn't run, he appeared. His arm swept down in one clean arc, and the blackjack kissed Leo's temple with the elegance of a muted violin chord. Banner crumpled, not gracefully. I clapped once, not out of disrespect, but appreciation. "Nicely done," I said. Saul gave me a look. "You had your dramatic moment." I had mine. I pointed to Wolfe. Maestro's turn. Katya was white as her sleeve. Dmitri muttered something in Russian that might have been a prayer or a proverb. Eliza just stared at Leo's limp form like he might evaporate. Wolfe, unfazed, lowered himself back into his chair with the deliberation of a man settling into victory. "Fritz," he called calmly, behind them as they left, turned back, and saw Wolfe lift his beer with the solemnity of a judge and the faintest glint of satisfaction behind his eyelids. The curtain had fallen, and this time there was no applause. The sun was already climbing up Manhattan's laundry-streaked skyline when I stirred, but the brownstone felt oddly subdued, like a piano missing its high E. Usually Wolfe's post-case mornings were a cacophony of sighs, grunts and lectures, mostly aimed at me, but that day the silence had texture. I padded down the hallway in my socks and found the office empty, the red leather chair unoccupied, and the air perfumed with a faint trace of orchid mist. Wolfe, naturally, was locked in the plant rooms, probably whispering sweet nothings to a dendrobium. That left me alone, with a cold cup of coffee, a full ashtray, and a folder labelled Miska. I cracked it open, mostly out of habit. No new corpses, no hidden motives suddenly tap-dancing off the page. Just photos, scribbled notes, and the residue of something that had once been art, love, and murder stirred into a single performance. I lit a cigarette and leaned back. The show was over, but the curtain hadn't quite fallen in my head, which was when the doorbell rang, because naturally, silence never stays long around here. It was Inspector Kramer, radiating the usual mix of nicotine, municipal leather, and perpetual indigestion. He stomped past me like he owned the parquet floor and dropped his considerable bulk into Wolfe's chair, an act bordering on the sacrilegious. "I figured you'd both be gloating over coffee and sausages," he grunted. I offered him neither. "Wolfe's communing with his orchids," I said. "I'm communing with my blood pressure." Kramer rolled his eyes. "He's still got the touch, I'll give him that. Nailed Kovarik like a violin to a case lid. I've got the confession, the sheet music, the rehearsal notes, and Saul's damn near poetic statement." He stood and adjusted his coat like it had betrayed him. "Don't tell him I said this," he muttered. But he was right. Again I raised an eyebrow. "It was a fluke," he barked, "and there's still no law against being a smug bastard." I escorted him to the door, resisting the urge to salute. Watching Kramer leave with the confession in his pocket and a half-swallowed scowl on his face felt like a proper encore. Not that Wolfe would appreciate the applause. Back at my desk, I found myself staring at a black-and-white still of Arena Miska, mid-pirouette. It had been clipped from Dance America a year before the final performance. Her face, sharp as porcelain, looked towards a spotlight only she could see. In motion, she must have been thunder wrapped in lace. But it wasn't the fall that stuck with me. It was the refusal. The orchestra trailing off, the audience frozen in their velvet seats, and Arena not bowing. Just standing there, arms limp, gaze distant, chest heaving, and then collapse. Wolfe had called it instinct, said she felt something had been tampered with in the rhythm itself, a perfectionist with absolute timing, betrayed by a shift only she could sense. Was it conscious? The decision not to reward Leo's silent sabotage with a final gesture. Or was it her body, rebelling against the violence inside the music? I couldn't say. But that missing bow, her ghost note, haunted me more than any scream ever could. It was the absence of closure, the unfinished phrase that told us more than applause ever could. A ballerina's last protest, given not with words, but with silence. By 11, I surrendered to the scent of roasted shallots and truffled eggs drifting from the kitchen. Fritz was in his element, whisking with one hand, sautéing with the other, and humming a familiar tune I couldn't quite place, until he hit the chorus like a piano falling downstairs. "Tchaikovsky?" I asked. "Sleeping Beauty," he beamed, "for the soufflé's mood." I was about to compliment his culinary harmony when a door slammed and Wolfe barged in, his gait somewhere between a march and a waddle. "Fritz!" he barked. "That was not Sleeping Beauty. That was a blasphemous distortion. A G in place of an F sharp. An offense to harmony and humanity." Fritz blushed, spoon halfway to the ramekin. "My dear man." Wolfe settled into his chair with a grunt that meant speak. So I did. "You know," I said, "it's not often a ballerina drops dead to tell us a secret. But somehow you always manage to find the rhythm in the silence." Wolfe didn't glance up. "Archie." "Yes, sir?" I heard that, and I declined to respond. Fair enough. I returned the file to its drawer, letting the click of the cabinet stand in for punctuation. The quiet lingered, thick with all the things we didn't say, like how justice can sometimes pirouette instead of march, or how vengeance can be composed in allegro and delivered without a word. Wolfe sipped. I leaned against the window. Outside, the world honked and roared, oblivious as always. Inside, the music had stopped, but the meaning played on. The orchids were misted at precisely 4:45, Wolfe's daily ritual. He stood among the blooms like a retired tyrant in exile, one hand clutching his beer, the other adjusting a spray nozzle with exaggerated precision. I sat in the office, flipping through a back issue of Tempo, while the Victrola spun one of Irina's older recordings. The final pas de deux with Valo, captured before it all unravelled. Wolfe returned, slightly damp around the collar. "The orchids are content," he announced. Unlike most witnesses, he ignored that, of course. I stood, slid the finished report into its folder, and slotted it into place. Case closed. Murder solved. Curtain down, but the music still played, soft and defiant. I didn't lift the needle. I let it run, warped edges and all. "Wolfe," I said, "do you think she knew?" His eyes met mine for half a second. She felt it. That sufficed. He lifted his glass. I nodded, and the record spun. Unbroken, yes, but forever changed. In the hush that followed the final note, justice stood quietly at centre stage, unapplauded but undeniable. A life spent in pursuit of precision ended in defiance, and a vengeance written in tempo found its silence. Wolfe, orchids restored and beer in hand, returned to his routine, but somewhere a record still spins, haunted by a measure out of place. Do you believe Irina truly knew her time had come? Or was her final refusal a dance